In Lagos, 29-year-old Amara Okoye sat quietly in a glass office, staring at the final document in front of her. $40 million. That was the number. Years of working late, missing sleep, saying no to distractions, and pushing through doubt had all led to this moment. When she signed her name, it wasn't just a deal. It was proof that everything she had sacrificed meant something. She smiled, but it was a calm, controlled smile. Amara was never the type to celebrate loudly. On her way home, she imagined how the evening would go. Maybe Tund would be proud. Maybe his family would finally see her differently. She wasn't asking for a party, just a simple "we're proud of you." That felt fair. But the moment she walked into the house, something felt off. The living room was quiet, too quiet. Tund looked up from his phone, gave a short smile and went back to scrolling. His mother greeted her politely, but her tone felt distant. Even his sisters, who usually had something to say, barely looked at her. It was subtle, but Amara noticed everything. At dinner, the conversation felt forced. Small talk, quick responses, long silences. No one mentioned her deal. Not even once. Amara tried to ignore it, telling herself maybe they didn't know yet. Maybe they were tired. But deep down she felt it, that shift. Something had changed. By the time night fell, the air in the house felt heavy. And Amara had a feeling this silence was just the beginning. From the outside, Amara's marriage looked like a dream. She was married to Tund Balogun, a man from one of the most respected and well-connected families in Lagos. They lived in a beautiful home, attended the right events, and were always seen as the perfect couple. People admired them. Some even envied her. But what people saw and what Amara felt were two very different things. Tund was calm, well-spoken, and carried himself with quiet confidence. At first, that's what attracted her to him. He seemed stable, mature, and supportive. But over time, Amara started noticing small things. Things that didn't feel right but were easy to ignore in the moment. In their home, decisions were rarely discussed with her. They were simply made. Family plans, financial choices, even things that directly affected her life were often decided by Tund and his mother before she even heard about them. If she asked questions, the answers were always smooth, almost rehearsed. "Don't worry, it's handled. This is how we do things." It never sounded harsh, but it also never felt like she had a real voice. Tund's mother, Mrs. Balogun, was always calm and elegant, but there was a quiet control in everything she did. She didn't need to raise her voice. A look, a simple comment, or even silence was enough to make her point. Her daughters were the same in a softer way. They moved through the house like everything already belonged to them, like Amara was just fitting into their world, not building one of her own. At first, Amara told herself this was just how strong families worked. She didn't want to seem difficult or ungrateful, so she adjusted. She stayed polite, kept things peaceful, and focused her energy on her work. And that's where she felt most like herself. In her business, she made her own decisions. She built things from nothing. She earned respect on her own terms. It gave her a sense of control she didn't have at home. But what she didn't fully realize was this. Her independence, the very thing she was proud of, was slowly becoming a problem in her marriage. While she thought she was simply growing, building her own path, the family saw something else. They saw someone they couldn't easily control anymore. The night after closing her deal, Amara walked into the house with a quiet sense of pride. She wasn't expecting anything big, just a simple moment, maybe a kind word. But the second she stepped inside, she knew something was different. Tund was already seated in the living room. His mother was there too. His sisters sat close by, all unusually quiet. No TV, no music, no normal evening noise. Just silence that felt heavy. "Come and sit," Tund said. That was the first sign. This wasn't a normal conversation. Amara sat down slowly, her eyes moving from one face to another. No one smiled. No one asked about her day. Tund cleared his throat and started speaking, calm but distant. "We need to talk about something important." Amara felt a slight tension in her chest but stayed quiet. "You've changed," he said. "You've become too independent." She blinked, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means," his mother cut in smoothly, "you're no longer acting like a wife who understands her place in this family." The words didn't come with anger. That's what made them worse. They were cold, measured. Like this had been discussed many times before she walked in. Amara tried to respond, to make sense of it. "I've been working. I've been building." "And that's the problem," Tund interrupted. "Everything is about your work now. Your decisions. Your moves. You don't consider the family." Amara felt the ground shift under her. "I've done all of this for us," she said, her voice tightening. But no one reacted. His mother leaned forward slightly. Your success is starting to disrupt the structure of this family. Things are becoming unbalanced. Unbalanced. That word stayed in the air like it meant something bigger than she understood. And then it happened. Tund looked straight at her and said, "We think it's best if you leave." Amara froze. Leave? For how long? There was a pause. A very small one. Not temporarily, he said. Completely. For a second, everything went silent in her head. She thought she heard it wrong. But then one of his sisters stood up and walked toward the hallway. That's when Amara noticed it. Her suitcase. Right there. But, waiting. No warning. No conversation before this. Just a decision already made. That was the moment it hit her. This wasn't an argument. It wasn't emotional. It was planned. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she had ever felt. Not because they were asking her to leave, but because they had already decided her place in their lives was over, without her even knowing. Amara stood outside the house with her suitcase beside her, the door already closed behind her. No one followed. No one called her back. The same house she had lived in, laughed in, and built memories in now felt like it had erased her in a single moment. What surprised her most was not the pain. It was the silence. She didn't cry. She didn't knock on the door. She didn't beg. She just stood there, very still, like her mind was trying to catch up with what had just happened. Cars passed. The night moved on like nothing had changed. But for her, everything had. After a few minutes, she picked up her suitcase and walked to her car. Her hands were steady. Her face was calm. But inside, something was shifting fast. As she drove through the streets of Lagos, one thought kept repeating in her head. This was not sudden. This was planned. By the time she checked into a small hotel in Victoria Island, the shock had settled into something clearer. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in the same clothes, and just stared ahead. Then the memories started coming back. All the small moments she had ignored. The times decisions were made without her. The quiet looks between Tund and his mother. The way her success was never fully acknowledged. The subtle comments about balance and knowing her place. It all started to make sense. This was never about her being a bad wife. It wasn't about attitude or behavior. It was about control. They were comfortable when she was fitting into their system, when her success didn't feel bigger than theirs. But the moment she stepped into her full power, the moment she proved she could stand on her own, everything changed. And then the truth hit her even harder. They thought they could remove her from the house, and still stay connected to everything she had built. Amara let out a slow breath and leaned back against the wall. For the first time that night, her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. They stayed there, held back by something stronger. Because along with the pain, something else was growing. Clarity. A sharp, quiet understanding that she had been seeing pieces of the truth for a long time but chose to ignore them. She wasn't confused anymore. She wasn't questioning herself. And instead of breaking her, that realization did something unexpected. It made her stronger. Sitting alone in that small hotel room with nothing but her suitcase and her thoughts, Amara didn't feel weak. She felt awake. The next morning, Amara didn't waste time sitting in her emotions. She woke up early, ordered coffee, opened her laptop, and started going through everything. Her deal documents, contracts, emails, messages, even old notes she had saved. If there was one thing she trusted, it was her work. And right now, her work held answers. At first it looked normal. Agreements, signatures, timelines. But as she slowed down and paid closer attention, small details started to stand out. Names. Connections. Introductions that didn't seem random anymore. She noticed how certain business opportunities had come through Tund's family network. At the time, she thought it was just support, just connections being shared. But now, looking at it from a distance, it felt more strategic than helpful. There were people tied to her deals who were also quietly connected to Tund's family. Not directly enough to raise questions, but close enough to benefit if things went a certain way. Amara leaned back, her mind racing. Then it clicked. This wasn't just about her being too independent. That was just the excuse. Tund and his family had positioned themselves carefully around her success. They didn't need to own her business directly. They just needed access to it, through influence, through relationships, through proximity. As long as she stayed in the family, everything she built would naturally flow in their direction. Her success wasn't a problem before, because they thought it belonged to them too. But the moment she started moving fully on her own, making bigger decisions without leaning on them, that access became uncertain. And that's when she became a threat. Removing her from the house wasn't emotional. It was strategic. A way to shake her, to make her feel unstable, maybe even push her into a position where she would depend on them again. But they made one serious mistake. Amara had built everything in her own name. Every contract, every account, every decision. She had always been careful even when she trusted them. Not out of fear but out of discipline. And now that discipline was protecting her. The more she reviewed, the clearer it became. There was no real control over her business without her. No hidden ownership. No silent takeover. Just assumptions they had made, believing she would always stay where they placed her. Amara closed her laptop slowly, a calm expression on her face. For the first time since that night she felt something close to relief, because now she understood everything. And more importantly, she knew they had nothing. Amara didn't call Tund. She didn't send messages. She didn't try to explain or argue. After everything she had seen, she knew one thing clearly. This was not the time for emotions. This was the time to move smart. So she went quiet. From the outside it looked like she had disappeared. No public reaction. No drama. No statements. But behind the scenes she was moving faster and sharper than ever. The first calls she made were to her lawyers. She sat in clean, quiet offices across Lagos, going through every contract line by line. No rushing. No assumptions. She asked direct questions, listened carefully, and made sure everything was exactly where it needed to be. If there was even the smallest gap, it was fixed immediately. Then came her financial advisors. Accounts were reviewed. Access points were checked. Old permissions that she had once given casually, out of trust or convenience, were removed. Every door that had been left slightly open was now fully closed. She didn't stop there. Amara traveled to Abuja to meet a few key partners face to face. These were people she trusted, people who respected her work, not her connections. In those meetings she was calm but firm. Structures were adjusted. Roles were clarified. And most importantly, loyalty was quietly confirmed. No one needed the full story. Her actions said enough. Back in Lagos, she continued tightening everything. New systems were put in place. Communication became more direct. Fewer middlemen. Fewer assumptions. Everything now ran through her, clearly and cleanly. What made it powerful was how silent it all was. While Tund and his family probably expected a reaction, anger, panic, maybe even an attempt to come back, Amara gave them nothing. No access. No noise. No weakness. Just distance. And control. The same discipline that helped her build her success was now protecting it. She wasn't rushing to prove anything. She wasn't trying to win publicly. She was simply making sure that every part of her life and business was fully hers again. Day by day, piece by piece, she rebuilt her position. Not from scratch but stronger than before. And the scariest part? No one saw it happening until it was already done. Weeks passed in quiet focus, and then Amara made her move. Without warning, she announced that her company would be expanding into international markets. New offices, new clients, new opportunities across Europe and Asia. The news hit Lagos business circles like a spark in dry grass. Conversations buzzed in offices, coffee shops, and online forums. People admired the boldness, the clarity, the sheer scale of what she was doing. Her name was everywhere. Not as someone connected to a wealthy family, not as someone leaning on someone else's network. Just Amara Okoye. Powerful. Independent. Unstoppable. Meanwhile, Tund's family watched quietly, and that's when the full weight of what she had done sank in. All the subtle ways they had tried to stay tied to her success. Old introductions, social connections, whispered influence, suddenly didn't matter. Without her cooperation, without her name and authority backing it, their networks held no power. All those assumptions they had made about benefiting from her hard work evaporated overnight. It wasn't dramatic. There were no confrontations, no public callouts. That's what made it devastating. The shift was invisible to everyone else, but Tund and his family felt it immediately. Deals they had hoped to influence now moved forward without them. Invitations they thought they controlled didn't arrive. The quiet corridors of Lagos business circles, where influence mattered, had become close to them. Amara didn't celebrate publicly. She didn't post triumphant messages or flaunt her victories. Her success was the statement itself. Every new contract, every announcement, every expansion was a clear signal. She was fully in control and no one else had a place in her path unless she allowed it. For the first time, the power dynamic that had been quietly threatened for years had reversed completely. She didn't need to fight. She didn't need to explain. Her work, her discipline, and her decisions spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. By the time the city realized what had happened, Amara's position was unshakable. And for Tund and his family, the lesson was clear. Influence without access is meaningless, and they had lost both, without her even raising her voice. As Amara's company grew and her reputation expanded, the shift became impossible to ignore. She was no longer just a businesswoman in Lagos. She had become a force in international markets. Every new deal she closed, every client she signed, only strengthened her position. And the more she rose, the more Tund's world quietly started to unravel. Deals he had counted on for years began slipping away. Partners who once relied on him started going directly to Amara. Invitations to business dinners, industry events, and networking meetings, things that had always been within reach, suddenly stopped coming. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable to anyone outside their circle, but Tund and his family felt it sharply. Their influence had always been connected to her credibility, her name, her achievements. Remove that and the structure they depended on began to collapse. It wasn't public. There were no headlines, no gossip. But in boardrooms and offices across Lagos, whispers started. Questions about Tund's relevance, about his ability to deliver, started surfacing. Where once he had been a connector, a reliable presence, now he was just another name, and a fading one at that. The family tried to adjust, to find ways to regain access, but every attempt only made it clearer. Their power had never been real on its own. It was borrowed, tied to Amara's success, and without her it didn't exist. They realized too late that control they thought they had was only an illusion. What had once seemed like dominance turned into isolation. Meetings they were supposed to lead no longer included them. Deals they assumed they could influence moved forward without a single word from them. Even social connections, the unspoken ties they had relied on for years, felt hollow and empty. For the first time, Tund and his family experienced the consequences of their actions. They had assumed she would always stay in the background, always be a part of their household and their network. But she hadn't just stepped out, she had built herself into something untouchable. And now, the very structures they thought made them powerful were crumbling around them. The quiet collapse was more painful than any confrontation could have been because it was undeniable. Without Amara, their control didn't exist. Their world, once steady and familiar, had shifted, and they were left on the outside looking in. A few weeks later, Tund reached out. He wanted to meet. Amara agreed, but she chose the place. A neutral office in Victoria Island, not the family home, not anywhere that gave him the comfort of control. She arrived calm, collected, carrying nothing but a notebook and her presence. When he walked in, he looked different, less confident, more cautious. The way he spoke carried a mix of regret and calculation. "I think we need to talk," he began, "about misunderstandings, about fixing things, about getting back on track." Amara listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flare up. She didn't bring up the nights she had spent outside the house, the suitcase waiting, the silence that had crushed her. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was clarity, control, and truth. He went on, trying to explain, trying to negotiate, trying to appeal to shared history. He spoke about family, about loyalty, about what they could rebuild together. Amara stayed still, her eyes steady. She let him talk because letting him speak didn't give him power. It only made the contrast clear. He was negotiating from a place of weakness now, not authority. Finally, when he paused, she spoke. Her voice was calm, even but firm. "Tund, I've listened. I understand what you're saying. But my life, my business, and my future no longer include you or your family. That door is closed. Completely." He looked at her, searching for some crack, some hesitation, but there was none. Not in her tone, not in her eyes, not in the way she carried herself. She didn't argue. She didn't threaten. She simply stated the truth. For the first time, Tund realized the shift that had already happened. The power that he thought he held, the influence, the control, the ability to sway outcomes, was gone. It wasn't that Amara had taken revenge. She hadn't needed to. She had just moved forward, calmly and deliberately, and left him behind. He nodded slowly, almost silently. There was no anger left, only recognition. The balance of their relationship had flipped. He had assumed control, influence, and presence. But now it was clear. Everything that mattered was in Amara's hands. She left the meeting the same way she entered, calm, unshaken, and fully aware that her independence and strength were untouchable. The game had changed and she was the one in control. Amara woke up each morning with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. The chaos, the betrayal, the cold words, they were behind her now. She wasn't running from anything. She was moving toward everything she wanted on her own terms. She invested in new projects, exploring markets she had only dreamed of before. She connected with people who respected her for her ideas, her discipline, and her vision, not because of her husband or his family. Meetings, deals, partnerships, they were all hers and they felt different this time. Clear, honest, fair. Her home, her schedule, her life, it all reflected what she valued, not what someone else expected of her. She traveled, she worked, she celebrated quietly, and she learned to trust herself more than anyone else. Every choice she made reminded her that she didn't need permission to succeed. Looking back, Amara realized the betrayal hadn't broken her. It had shown her a truth she might never have faced otherwise. She saw clearly who she could trust, where real support came from, and how strong she had always been when left to her own devices. Karma, she realized, wasn't about revenge or making people pay. It wasn't in shouting or fighting or trying to prove a point. It was in clarity. It was in independence. It was in moving forward with a life that could not be taken from her and consequences that unfolded naturally from truth. And in that quiet victory, Amara felt something rare. A freedom so complete it didn't need to be announced. She didn't have to prove herself anymore. She simply lived, successful, unshaken, and fully in control of her own story. Every step forward was proof that no betrayal, no family, no expectation could define her. Only she could.